Chapter 937 of One Piece is out, and just when we thought the story would be staying on track for some time, we actually got our first full Zoro chapter of Wano instead. And oh my god, there is so much to unpack. But before we cut to our favorite swordsman, the chapter first kicks off with 3 pages of teaser for the upcoming showdown in Udon Prison. We see the Croco Shark crew of Big Mom, Chopper, Momonosuke, Kiku and Tama heading towards the border between the Curry and the Udon region. And Big Mom and Tama seem to have developed a very bizarre kind of relationship since they are still busy discussing food. Compared to when we last got to see them though, they seem to have specialized on a dish now, Shiruko. To give you a small explanation of this, Shiruko is a hot traditional Japanese dessert that is especially enjoyed during winter. It consists of a sort of sweet porridge that is made from red beans and is usually served together with mochi in a bowl. Anyway, why did I call the relationship bizarre? Because while Tama is reminiscing the taste of the sweet beans, Big Mom explains to us that the texture of the mochi reminds her of that of a frog's eye, which not only I found very disturbing, but apparently also Kiku, who started to recognize Big Mom's obsession with the dish and seems a little worried. Which is nothing compared to Chopper, who is just sitting there with puffy cheeks and teary eyes, thinking what all of us think but not being able to spell it out for the rest. We already pretty much know from before that the setup here clearly seems to be another one of Big Mom's hunger pains. And now we also know the dish it will most likely be, namely Shiruko, which she must have tried somewhere back in the village. The question is where to find that now on their way to Udon. Before we get any more insights in this matter though, we cut over to the prison, where Luffy seems to have decided to continue his training. Instead of showing us his new physical power that he has trained, we get something even better. After focusing on honing his observation haki in his fight with Katakuri, Luffy now seems to start focusing on his armament haki. This is something I honestly didn't expect to happen so soon, and maybe this is just a little bit of foreshadowing to a later point in the story. But getting another flashback to Rayleigh and Luffy explaining to us that he wants to be able to use armament haki on the same high level that his teacher did gets me very excited about getting a focus on armament haki sometime in Wano. Luffy also proves that he has grown by analyzing and recognizing his master's skill. He remembers Rayleigh being able to deflect attacks without even touching his opponent, and he understands that his movements were much faster than his ones, and also much lighter. It is definitely refreshing to see Luffy use his head more here and then. More interestingly though, Rayleigh is a name that doesn't go unnoticed by Yogoro, who seems to know exactly who Luffy's talking about. I really want to see the conversation that these two hopefully will have once they made their escape, because I think they have a great deal to discuss. Meanwhile, the Vice Warden asks Queen why he didn't simply put in someone stronger like him to finish the execution quickly. And of course the only reason is that Queen enjoys having his show. Admittedly, usually there probably isn't too much going on in Wano, so the All-Star sits on his flamethrower, Mad Max wheelchair, and is munching on a bowl of food. What could that food possibly be? Of course, Queen is a really big fan of Shiruko, and he's the only one allowed to have it here in the prison. At this point, the setup is so obvious that I would almost be surprised if Oda didn't throw a curveball somewhere along the line. But then again, if it gives us Big Mom against Queen brawling over a bowl of beans, I'm afraid I won't be able to complain. While Big Mom, Tama and Queen now all seem to have formed the Shiruko fan club and are heading towards their first official meeting with a food fight included, we now finally cut over to Oihagi Bridge, where we left off last chapter with Zoro facing off against the Bankei, who we now get introduced to as Gyukimaru. And there's just so many great details in this scene, all of it got me really excited. We come right in when Zoro tries to explain to the Bankei that he met and fought Ryuma. And obviously though, not knowing the context, this story is not exactly believable, since Ryuma died many centuries ago. We learned that Wano was known as the country of gold back when the samurai was still alive, which has parallels with Japan, that was described as the country of gold by Marco Polo. It later turned out though that Japan was much rather the land of silver, since it had far greater deposits of silver ore than gold ore. If Wano actually had or didn't have this quantity of gold though, we don't know. Gyukimaru explains though that countless pirates as well as nobles tried to get Wano under their control to get their hands on the gold. Ryuma though was the samurai who apparently defeated Wano from any invaders. We also get a nice nudge to Oda's early manga Monsters, where we see the young Ryuma defeating a dragon. The story was made canon by Oda before, but we now hear it again from Gyukimaru. His explanation now transitions to Shusui, that together with Ryuma's body makes the national treasure of Wano, as we have already learned before. It becomes clear though that Ryuma seems to hold a way higher status in the country than we previously thought. Now in the next page we finally get some more information on the sword lore in One Piece, when Gyukimaru starts to explain that Shusui became a black sword. While he of course says this to express that he sees Zoro completely unworthy of wielding it, Zoro thinks what everyone thinks. I've always been curious about that. Before he can ask his opponent how swords turn to black swords though, someone cries for help in the distance, which makes Zoro turn around. Gyukimaru does not seem to care too much about that and starts attacking Zoro from behind, which leads to Zoro shouting at him. Next instant though, we see who has been crying for help. Toko, who is being carried by a very alive looking Kumurasaki. She and Kyoshiro manage to fake her death after all in some way and manage to escape with Toko. Kumurasaki is bleeding though, and a split second later we also see why. A Grim Reaper looking guy comes flying through the air towards the two girls, ready to strike with his two scythes and getting blocked by Zoro in the last instant. The man, who has a kind of creepy aura about him, is introduced to us as Kamazu the Manslayer, a wanted criminal from the capital. While he is known as a murderer in Wano, he actually serves as an assassin under the Shogun. His target, interestingly enough, is Toko, not Kumurasaki, who he doesn't even seem to recognize. The Shogun then probably doesn't know that Kumurasaki is still alive and only sent his killer after the girl who laughed at him. Kumurasaki, who seems to be in a very tight spot here, asks Zoro to save them for any kind of repayment. And Zoro, of course, being Zoro, who would have helped them out anyway, simply asks for some booze and some food after the fight. And then we actually get 5 pages of full Zoro action after a very, very long time. While I don't want to comment too much on the fight itself, since I think it's best enjoyed with your eyes, not your ears, I will say that I'm more than happy to see that the samurai in Wano live up to their name. While many of Kaido's subordinates seem to disappoint a little in terms of strength, Kamazu as well as Gyukimaru seem capable enough to give Zoro a real fight, which makes Wano country a lot more interesting in my opinion. After some amazing fighting scenes, Gyukimaru takes once again another stab at Zoro's back, which leads to Zoro having to evade mid-fight and him taking the scythe of his other opponent to the shoulder. Now the last double spread is simply gold. Instead of being shocked, Zoro pulls out the scythe from his shoulder and finally has 3 swords, or rather 2 swords and a scythe, but that seems to count. He puts it in his mouth and strikes down Kamazu with his first 3-sword style technique in Wano. So guys, I'm not gonna lie, this chapter was definitely too short, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. First of all, we got a suspiciously precise setup of a fight between Big Mom and Queen over the Shiroku Bowl, since Big Mom seems on the brink of one of her hunger pains again. We got Luffy foreshadowing his desire to upgrade his armament haki during Wano, which in itself is something that has me incredibly excited. I can't wait to find out more about how it works and how you can utilize it. Finally, we got a whole load of Zoro in this chapter, which felt incredibly overdue. Next to the 2 quite different fights with Gyukimaru and Kamazu, we learned a lot about the history of Wano, about Ryuma, as well as Shusui. I hope that Zoro will learn a lot more from Gyukimaru, who in my mind seems to be testing Zoro for his worthiness, and who probably in accordance to the legend of the Benkei will end up as one of Zoro's allies. We also learned that Kumurasaki actually staged her death together with Kyoshiro, who is by far the most confusing character in this arc so far. And I'm also looking forward to the dynamic between her, Toko and Zoro. Especially since Zoro has been to Toko's village before. The team that seems to be forming here promises a lot of amazing interactions and revelations. And we also have a clear reason now for Kumurasaki joining up with the Straw Hats. Lastly, I want to do a quick shout out to Zoro for seemingly being able to use any weapon whatsoever as a sword, and who I really wish to keep that scythe a little longer now somehow. To sum it up, this was an unexpected but nonetheless amazing chapter. I love the dynamic between the weird group that has formed at the Oihagi Bridge, and I'm excited to see what Luffy will step up his armament haki game, as well as for the arrival of Big Mom at Udon. But now let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you liked this video, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to be notified for any future content of mine. Or dislike, don't share and unsubscribe. It's a free world, people. Thanks so much for listening, I hope to see you around next time, and until then, have a great week.